Hello everybody, welcome back to the Talking Sock. I'm your host, Justin Horniker, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about another change to the MLS Cup Final playoff format. Pablo Mahler put off this tweet today, essentially confirming what had been rumored in October last year, and I'm of two minds here. I'm conflicted in that I just love single elimination tournaments so much. That's why the World Cup is so amazing when you get to the knockout stages. And I just love that intensity. Now, let's talk about the actual change to the playoff structure. And then let's talk about my issues I have with schedule congestion. We'll talk a little bit about what's come out in the MLS schedule today, because I think it's important to this conversation. And then I'll give my overall thoughts at the end. So Pablo put out this tweet that says, "This appears to be in motion. It's a total overhaul of the MLS postseason, featuring a World Cup-style competition. Top 8 teams in each conference advance into a group stage, with the top 8 group stage finishers advancing to single elimination bracket." So essentially, you have 4 groups of 4. The top 2 in each group move on to the knockout rounds. You're familiar with how this works. You just watched the World Cup. Congratulations. I am of two minds here. Like I said, I loved the single elimination style tournament this past season, and I think it gave us the outcome that we've long been looking for. We've been tweaking with this playoff format to try to find a way that benefits the higher table teams. You go through this grueling gauntlet of a regular season with all the travel going from March to September, and you want to be rewarded with that slog of putting this team together to finish first with a favorable outcome in the playoffs. And I think that this past year, we saw that, where LAFC won, and LAFC played Philadelphia Union, who are also a top team in the East. So you had 2 top teams battling, something that's never happened in the MLS Cup Final. And the number 1 seed, the Supporter Shield, ended up winning the MLS Cup Final. And I think for me, not only are in this format, are you rewarding the higher seed because they get to play a home game, which travel-wise in this country is so important when you realize how big US is, and teams that have the higher seed, that's so important too, because if you're hosting it on the West Coast, that means that an East Coast team is flying in and being thrown off by 3 hours in their circadian rhythm. Like, home field advantage is just so important in the US and MLS especially. So I loved that format. However, I am intrigued. I'm a sucker for a group stage, let me tell you. So I am intrigued by what that's going to look like. If that, so if you have 16 teams, are we now going regionally again? Or are we going 1 through 16 where, maybe 1, 2, 15, 16 or something like that? I think that could be interesting too. If you have a group where it looks, relatively straightforward, that 1 and 2 get through, and then, move down the line, you end up having a group that's 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that is a very interesting format, and one that would sell to me as well. My other concern, though, is how do you sell this to casual fans? Someone who only watches their local MLS team every now and then and wants to tune in for the playoffs. It has now made the barrier to entry so much higher, not just because so many games are going to be behind the Apple TV paywall, which I'm happy with, because it was going to be most likely that St. Louis games would be on Bally Sports, and regional networks, especially around here, are the fucking worst. So I love Apple TV for that, and the fact that I can watch games without blackouts. That is just so cool. But when not a lot of people have Apple TV compared to broadcast TV, compared to cable. We can go through that another day. But regional networks are dying, so Apple TV is good for that. But the barrier to entry, every time you put a hurdle in front of someone to watch something, it becomes significantly less likely that they are to watch it. And while soccer is growing in the US, we saw an all-time World Cup viewership numbers with not favorable TV times. Of course, that doesn't really apply to MLS, since those people aren't watching MLS a lot of times anyway. The barrier to entry just gets bigger and bigger when you complicate the playoff structure like you do. That being said, I think it's It's fine. It's okay. The other issues I have with it are, say you're LAFC. You are now building a roster to play through 5 different competitions. Now, quirks of the MLS schedule aside, that the fact that you're playing because of this, all of these competitions, Toronto has to open up the season at the end of February with a home game. I don't have to tell you why that's an issue. But you're playing from end of February to September into October. And now you're playing another competition at the end of it. You're taking a break in the middle of the season to play this month-long Leagues Cup with Liga MX, which will be fun too. But it just it expands the schedule so much. You're still playing 34 regular season games on top of however many games you're going to play in the Leagues Cup, which is going to be 15 groups of 3 plus Pachuca and LAFC getting a bye to the knockout stages. From those groups, you get your teams into the knockouts and more games from there. Every team is guaranteed 2 games at least, plus more. Plus, you're playing through a bunch of international windows, including the CONCACAF Gold Cup. So you're having your national team players potentially playing more and traveling more. You have any international friendlies you throw in there, which don't get me started on that. You have your US Open Cup games, which every team, of course, wants to win, is going to throw their best players at when you get to the point where MLS teams are drawn in. And then you have this longer tournament at the end of the season now. It is going to be, you're going to run into some problems, not just with having enough players, but player safety as well. You're putting a lot of miles, a lot of minutes on legs that didn't necessarily sign up for this, let's just say. I think in order for this to continue to be successful, we need to see more and more pulling back of the financial regulations that a lot of these clubs are under, the salary cap restrictions that a lot of these clubs are under. You're seeing that more and more, and as the league gets more established, as the league has more money poured into it, it becomes less of an issue. But it's still an issue, and the fact that roster sizes are relatively small for the amount of games that they're going to be playing, this is where having a 2 club becomes so important as well. I think going forward, the most successful teams across all competitions are going to be the team that implements their 2 team the best, reserve wise, that implements their academy the best in terms of low cost players that can move up and down their roster, and that rotates their squad the best, meaning that you're not running your players into the ground so that by the end of the season they're not exhausted and you start losing games. What's interesting to me, so Santi Rodriguez is a Colombian. He does the Spanish language broadcast for STL City. Talked about how this is the system that they have in Colombia, and often it benefits teams who are hot coming into the end of the season, which could be good and bad. Like I said earlier, the U.S. is such a big place geographically that I still think the higher table teams, as long as they have home field advantage, are going to be advantaged in this format as well. But I think he's right in that if you're hot coming into this format, there's now more leeway for you to succeed versus being an 8th seed, traveling to the best team and, being outmatched. Now you can have more of a chance to shithouse your way to a victory, per se. I don't know, man. I guess I'm okay with it the more that I talk about it. But I just want Don Garber and MLS officials to pick a fucking lane. Like, we just landed on this single elimination style tournament that put together the best playoffs in MLS playoff history. I like it so much better than the 2-leg final. And everyone's going to have their own opinion on what the best way to determine a regular season, a postseason winner is going to be. But the more competitions that MLS has, the more complexity they throw at this, the less it makes the MLS regular season seem important. Which is interesting because Don Garber said back in 2018, and this was actually from a Grant Wall post I found a little bit, RIP Grant Wall, but in 2018, speaking ahead of the 2019 season, he said, "The idea here is to continually work on making the regular season become more and more important." So winning in March is as important as winning in September or October. In our playoff format, the one we're evaluating is really going to place a strong emphasis on the regular season. So I ask you, Don, does this place a stronger emphasis on the regular season? That's yet to be seen. It's going to have to be some incentive to finish top in the league versus 16th. And I really need to see it. So anyways, let me know what you think of this playoff format down in the comments. I would love to know what you guys think. And let me know if you have a team that you root for or if you're just a casual fan. That's going to help me with my determination of what this really is. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If this is your first time stumbling upon my channel, give me a subscribe, give me that thumbs up. And yeah, folks, we will talk very, very soon. We have MLS Super Draft coming up tomorrow. I will have Talking Soccer podcast episode where I'm talking about the NWSL, NWSLPA joint investigation that I haven't talked about on the channel yet, and an STL podcast where we talk about Super Draft and how much we're looking forward to the St. Louis season. All right. Adios, folks.